Mr. Hall, are you with us today?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Welcome aboard, Dennis.
Thank you.
Dennis would like to spend a few minutes to talk about steps to preparing to reopen. And I'm going to leave my opener at that because I think we cut into your time a little bit.
Okay, I'll get through this quickly. As you know, the public discussion has shifted away from I call it the fear pandemic at the moment of how are we going to survive facing the virus versus now how do we function in this new world where the virus isn't gone, but we have to take what we know and deal with our unknowns to go forward and see what we can do and how we can open our business and live our lives. So we've called this preparing to reopen, but for most of us, it's not a reopening. Most businesses have continued. Obviously, if we look at the numbers, we've had an unprecedented drop in labor force participation. The press likes to talk in unemployment rates, which is kind of nonsense. The relevant statistic is the percentage of the labor force who are actively presenting the population who are eligible for the labor force who are actively participating. We dropped from about 72%, which was a recent historic high, to about 60%. So we've had about a 20% exit from the workplace in the last 6 weeks, and that is an historic economic event. At the same time, we obviously have had those in the workforce probably reduce their hours. And so now when we say reopen, what we mean is starting to really operate again. And obviously the different sectors of the economy that are affected more than others. And as obviously you can see travel, restaurants, retail, anywhere there's a lot of contact. Now, what's important and what I'm going to be able to, or what I want to convey to you, is that at the moment, we have a good set of guidelines from the CDC about how to approach reopening. What we need to do, though, is apply these to each of your businesses. And every business is different. It's different in how we interact with the employees, what our business environment is like, and what our interaction with our customers are like. I would encourage everybody to try to find trade associations, others in your business that are working through the same problems. For example, earlier today I saw that the National Restaurant Association had put out its beginning thoughts about how to re-enter business. Every business needs to try to approach what they're doing, whether you're a medical office, whether you're a regular office. Each will have different problems, and that's something that you're going to have to pay attention to on your own. The CDC, as we can see here, has organized this by looking at three main areas. How do you reduce transmission among your own employees? Secondly, how do you maintain healthy business operations? That is, how do you deal with your customers in the outside world? And third, how do you maintain a healthy working environment or physical space? Now, this becomes a legal issue because simply in implementing this, we're going to start discussing and worrying about all of those acronyms that we have in labor law, the most significant one being OSHA. OSHA regulates workplace safety, and you need to be aware that you have a duty to provide a safe working environment for your employees, and you're going to be very concerned about OSHA. At the same time, you're going to be concerned about discrimination. Discrimination is important. Why? Because the one thing that we've learned over the last 6 weeks, and there's really very little we've learned about the virus, is that the virus doesn't like older people, all right? And the law says you can't discriminate against older people. So if you have a worker who is 70 and wants to return to work, can you keep them from coming back? Because that itself is apparently a risk. The answer to that question is no, but you need to be aware. I mean, we have a lot of very talking to a son-in-law who's an emergency room doctor, and he was noting that there are emergency room doctors who are over 60, 65, 70 who want to continue to work. A lot of people do. You don't want to fade out. You want to fade out in life, not suddenly disappear at times. And they're the ones taking significant risk simply in what they're doing. So we have a lot of issues with the environmental laws, the labor laws with OSHA, and we're going to have to be aware of that as we develop our plans. On the next slide, reduce transmission among employees, right? And so what the CDC says is that you need to consider how do you protect workers. And here they point out what we know: those who are vulnerable, that is, have pre-existing conditions, and those who are older adults. So you cannot necessarily treat two employees the same. Someone who has a serious condition which would make them vulnerable would be more likely to continue telework, for example, if you could, and you will have a duty to try to continue to set up telework. What about people who, although they're not vulnerable, live with someone who is vulnerable? They're going to be reluctant to perhaps enter the workplace again, especially if that workplace involves a lot of face-to-face contact with the outside world. So do you modify the job? Do you allow them to stay home? You're going to have to face those types of issues. Again, right now, the recommendation is minimize face-to-face contact. The old 6-foot rule, which itself is something which is not necessarily a hard and fast rule, because it's, basically what I've seen, the way it was developed was there was studies done on a controlled environment. They were able to look at airplanes and see with a certain virus where, if they knew somebody was sick, people getting off the plane ended up sick within the next few weeks. And they determined it was about 2 rows. 2 rows is about 6 feet. So we have the 6-foot rule. They then rationalized and said, well, that's, when you're talking, that's about how far the little globules that we're talking go. But we've also had instances now where, say, choirs have had a high incidence of transmission. So the 6-foot rule is convenient, but it's not an absolute. And you need to be very concerned that you're not the expert here. We can follow this type of guidance, but we're going to, at the same time, have to depend on public health expertise. And there's a lot of bad stuff out there right now. So you need to try to, look to the CDC, look to others, and worry about the trade-off between what the marginal cost is for any particular worker versus the benefit. Obviously, the most important thing to do, as they say, is separate sick employees from the workforce. Somebody comes in with symptoms, definitely send them home. If somebody is confirmed to have coronavirus and they have been at work, now you have a duty to do contact tracing and tell other people who are working there that exposure has occurred, while at the same time maintaining confidentiality. Obviously, here you might also want to have a policy of checking everyone's temperature when they come in the morning to see that they don't have any symptoms that would cause you to send them home. But of course, it's medical information. Do you want to store that? Probably not. So again, now you've got privacy concerns as well as monitoring concerns. Oops, I didn't mean that. Go ahead and
Dennis, you with us?
Slide.
There you are.
Yeah, we are, yes. On the next slide, you can see that the next concern then is maintaining healthy business operation. So now, essentially what this is that you need to put together a response plan. And here we're going to find out how deficient we've all been. I look at the same area in terms of the, the next personal pandemic you might face is a cybersecurity attack. Do you have a response plan for that? Most of us don't have a response plan for this. We now need to do this on the fly. And we need to do it now before people show up. They recommend having a workplace coordinator, that is someone who's responsible for the overall plan. You need to look at your sick leave and HR policies and try to modify them for this current situation. Emergency sick leave issues. You have issues of the Temporary Leave Act and how it applies to return to workers who have been furloughed and now returning. It does. So you're still going to have to deal with that law. And you're going to have to worry about workers who are concerned about their own health. Let's just say that they have unsubstantiated fears, which is happening today. If they don't want to return to work, but they don't have a reason to stay home and they are asymptomatic, what do you do? All right. Again, you continue to furlough them. Obviously, you don't have to pay them. At that situation, are they eligible for unemployment? They may not be. These are going to be individual situations which are difficult. And I know these are happening. Again, talking to the emergency room son-in-law, he's getting people who are being sent in asking to be tested when they have no symptoms. And they have been sent in at times by employers who want to know that they have a healthy worker or they have a older worker who's concerned about younger workers. Well, obviously the hospital system doesn't work that way. We don't have that type of testing now. And you're going to have to try to work around and approach this. On the next slide.
While the slide's turning, it's an interesting point you just brought up about having an employer go in and order the test.
Yes.
Because let's say you get the test back and it says that they're not affected. So then you bring them back to work on, say, Monday morning. Well, then the follow-up question is then, well, what do you do Tuesday? Because they went home. They possibly went to some establishment. Maybe they live close to a border. They went across the state line to visit an establishment that has less lockdowns in the state that we do. So then are you testing them on Tuesday? And then Wednesday and Thursday. And so it's like and I believe what you're talking about is creating your exposure control plans is,
right.
Where, how are you outlining how you're going to be testing, your specific employees on a day-to-day basis or not at all?
Right. And that's, and certainly what kind of testing, obviously the easiest testing is having someone observe the employee and see if they're symptomatic, having their temperature checked every day, and controlling them when they come in, trying to identify if somebody becomes symptomatic, separating from the workforce quickly. We also have the problem that we place often too much faith in testing. The tests that have been developed are not, especially the ones that are not done in a clinical situation. That is the ones that are available to you out of work, have a lot of false positive and negatives. You have to question how accurate they are. So they're not a perfect protection, and that's the world we live in. And we're going to have to handle it. Your business plan has to look at also going forward on you doing an evaluation of what your essential functions are and how you're going to continue to provide those essential functions and how you might want to alter your provision of those functions so that you can continue during our new world here until we get to a world that we really are relaxed. You have to worry about your suppliers. You have to worry about your existing customers. If you're going to have to do a triage on your customers, how are you going to do it? Who are you going to serve first? How are you going to handle it? Are there parts of your business that you'll wish to suspend because you're not at full force? You need to worry about not just your employees, but if you have contract, temporary employees, how are they being treated? And do they have the same economic incentives or that others do, that your other employees do? And people are, as Peter was pointing out, with the current unemployment subsidies, for some workers, it's more, it's easier and you get greater remuneration by staying home than going to work. Again, they recommend talk with business partner in the industry about a response. I highly recommend that simply because you're going to find out a lot from this. Is a part that your industry needs to come together and use everyone's experience to get best practices within your industries. You need to be ready for a spike in absenteeism. It is perhaps a fiction. We hope it's true that we'll have declining rates of illness, but we may not. So now's the time to plan. How are we going to respond if we have absenteeism? How are we going to respond if people have to stay home to take care of sick family members, to take care of children? So you really need to pay more attention to absenteeism and its causes right now. And one thing they suggest is you might want to consider cross-training employees for critical functions. Next slide, please. Okay, the next thing they point out, the CDs, is you need to maintain a healthy work environment. How do you do that? Number one, engineering controls, increase ventilation rates, increase the percentage of outdoor air circulating. That's getting to be a wish in Arizona when suddenly it's going to be or there is today over 100. So our ability to open the windows is reduced. How do you increase ventilation rates? I talk about the building that we're in. We have a medical facility there. It would be obvious that perhaps our building should segregate the people going to primary care response in that medical facility from in an elevator from the rest of the building. We need to start making these changes that you see. Respiratory etiquette. This is all of the stuff that we are now learning. I like hand washing. They say sing happy birthday twice. The better etiquette I like is to sing kill, 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 because actually what I've read, soap is not what kills it kills it better than sanitizer. So
I found that singing Baby Shark to Daddy Shark is effective.
I like kill, just to kill. Right?
Sorry.
But do you have hand sanitizers around work? Do you have wipes? You have soap and water several places. How often are the bathrooms being cleaned? How often is the kitchen being sanitized? And thank God, I don't mind handshaking, but we're discouraging it. But certainly group hugs are now passe. Next slide, please. Okay, again, environmental cleaning. That's the business to be in today, I think. How are you going to clean and disinfect touch surfaces? Are you going to be cleaning phones, keyboards, doorknobs, handrails? You need a plan that gets that done systematically. You need to make certain that employees aren't sharing devices at all. Don't let them share keyboards or, look at your workplace and separate people physically and also in this sequential physical place. And do you have these? And we're all struggling. How do you get these products? Again, the CDC website is the best place to go to get information about this. Next slide, please. Okay. Advise employees. Part of any plan needs to be training. Don't assume that as you study this that your employees understand things, because they don't. We're driven more by personal fear than rational thought, and you need to supply the rational thought. If your business requires travel, what is your policy going to be? If you're over 65, it may not be the time that you want to be on a plane. But how do you handle that? Can you require younger workers to travel versus older workers? Again, is that age discrimination? Is it practical? Those are some significant issues for some employers. Again, you need to monitor workers for illness if they travel. Whether they're sick, can you keep them out of the office if they're the ones venturing into the more risky area of the workplace, which certainly planes would be right now. Group meetings, obviously, we've moved to the computer video conferencing and teleconferencing. It's probably a new world, something that we all feel better doing. Do you all need to be in a conference room together now? How are you going to have client meetings? How do you handle meetings? Again, that should be part of your plan. Okay, Peter, one more.
Was there supposed to be one more? That was it.
That was it, yes. So I missed one. Did I miss 3B?
So I think if I'm kind of summarizing what you're kind of going over is that you've got to develop an exposure control plan, which is going to involve a number of individuals in the organization, which is most likely going to be leadership and human resources. You're focusing on your workplace, which is going to, and how you're going to maintain it from your employees' perspective, but then also from your customers' perspective if you're in a retail organization. How you're going to manage customers coming in, how you're going to manage employees coming in, right, and that interaction.
Right.
In addition to doing almost the same thing with your supply chains, right?
Yes.
So if you're making a product, are your supply chains open in different states that might be closed? What are they going to be doing? What are their strategies to make sure that they can produce whatever your organization is going to be receiving from them?
Right.
And then is to kind of walk the fine line of being fair and reasonable in a workplace environment without crossing OSHA, right? ADA.
Employment discrimination.
Gosh, I know there's a title. Was it Title 7 or Article 7 in the labor relations, where
Sure.
If you have a participant or an employee comes to you that says, "I'm uncomfortable working in this environment," then we're required to provide a safe working environment for them. And so now we have to come up with responses, and how do we deal with that?
Right. Right. And the most important thing, which is often ignored, is that workers have a right to discuss their work environment among themselves. That's the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board issues. Do not try to interfere or discourage any way your employees from discussing these issues among themselves. That's a serious legal mistake. So don't do that. So in summary, and I do like the CD summary. You need a plan. You need to put together a response plan and to constantly tweak it as you go forward. You need somebody responsible for that plan. You need to look at how you are going to protect your employees, how you reduce transmission among them. You need to look at your business operations and say, how are we going to operate and what changes are we going to make, or are we going to be prepared to make for future problems? And you need to look at the physical work environment and say, what do we need to do to alter or maintain it in this new world that we're facing until we can feel safer.
Right. And almost writing it with the knowledge that if we reopen the state, and actually I'll bring Diana on in a second to see if Governor Ducey made any announcements, because I think he was talking about the same time, is that you write this plan with the opportunity that you're actually going to be probably closing down, possibly in the near future, if we have another.
Well, not just that. Let me make this point, which is that you have a responsibility to your workers and your business that extends well beyond what Governor Ducey decides. So whether he says reopen, not reopen, how we're going to do it, you have all of these issues. You need this plan. You're not going to get a free bill of business health simply because a governor says everybody can go back to work. In fact, if you look at the first order that the governor put out, it was very carefully written, and it says you can go back to work, but it very explicitly placed a high burden on the employer to take the steps that we're talking about here. And so, Governor Ducey, in issuing his first order, and I expect in his future orders, is not going to reduce your liability significantly for what you should do for in the workplace. So you need to take to heart the need to put together a response.
Okay. And Dennis, I got a question. And actually, Diana, if you're with us, this question might be coming to you too. Is COVID-19 transmission at the workplace still considered OSHA recordable? And if so, how do you recommend a company that the OSHA incident is critical to the operation of the company? Who wants to take that one?
I'm here. I haven't seen specific guidelines on the coronavirus being recordable, like on the 300 log. And it's tied again to that workers' comp where the things that I've been seeing is if somebody is saying I caught COVID at my workplace, submit it to workers' comp and then let them make that determination on if it is or is not covered in that direction.
Right, I'm not certain that I can address directly the issue. I think OSHA still is struggling with some of these issues also right now. But again, this is going to be industry specific. I have seen some guidelines that say if you're a first responder or you work in a medical office and you contract coronavirus, then there is a presumption that you contracted it through work. If you're running a Subway shop, employee does not get the same presumption. So we're again looking at this through the lens of a very industry specific analysis.
Yeah, because I know there are some pushbacks between the states and workers' comp, and it sounds like it's extending even a little bit farther. Interesting. Okay, so we're up at about a little bit over an hour. I appreciate everyone's patience. And Diana, did Ducey have any comments while we were speaking, or is that at a different time?
He hasn't spoken yet, so we don't have any guidelines yet from the governor of when or if we are opening and what that looks like yet. So we'll have to keep an eye on it, and as soon as we have more details, we will definitely try to share it with everybody.
Okay, great. Well, thanks
Apparently
everyone
he must have gotten the message.
Yes, Matt, he did.
You are very generous in your compliments, sir. But I do want to thank everyone's time. Sorry we took a few minutes late. If I remember correctly, the way the Zoom meetings were structured at this is a reoccurring meeting, which I think today was the final. So we'll be setting up an additional invite request. So for anybody that's listening or still on the phone today, the sign-on credentials I'll try and keep the same, but they may change. I know that our team is also reaching out to everybody on an individual basis just because we've been learning that a number of the campaign emails that we've been sending out from a newsletter perspective have been captured up into spam. So please check any spam filters that you may have if you've not received any invites in the last number of weeks. And then we've also are distributing a survey out to everybody, just with real quick questions. It might take 3 minutes to complete. On what are you finding valuable? What methods of communications are you finding valuable? And how we can be of different services to you and your organizations. So with that, I think I'm going to adjourn the meeting, and I will talk with everybody in the future. And have a safe week.